Happy Halloween, paisanos! Oh, I'm gonna be late for Halloween this year, am I? Well, to that I say, it is still Halloween. According to me, all your Christmas, keep that Mariah Carey frozen for a bit longer. Okay, I wanted to make a tiny bit of a Halloween video, but things didn't turn out right. My life is tired as crap, and I barely upload content on this channel because I want to take better care of my own mental health instead of desperately chasing arbitrary cloud numbers on a social media platform. So let's kind of change that for a bit. I like to consume more films as well as other sorts of media I got the time for. I really do. Recently, I've gotten myself into trying to consume more black cinema to have a somewhat basis of inspiration for future works of mine as well, from movies and media alike. And yeah, that isn't just limited to video games. In the process of consuming more films, and since the spooky month it happened, I decided to challenge myself to watch and review all the horror films I can by random fingerpicking from Letterboxd watch during the remainder of October. And look, why not do a horror theme video for the end of the spooky month with a sort of terrible costume that I quickly came across? So I watched, including in our Discord's movie nights, a grand total of 10 horror films. These are the horror films I watched, even with popcorn in hand. Some are better, and a lot better than others when you can notice the patterns here about a very specific viral horror clown that I just became hyperfixated on. And I found out as well that a lot of these horror movies don't really scare me that much, even when they're a blast to watch. Personally, hell, the scariest experience I had was with Andreas Marshall's segment on the 2015 film anthology German Angst, which I had never had since childhood when I had my eyes on seeing E.T.'s face on a VHS or the Dick logo on TV. Maybe it's due to the fact that I've grown pretty old and wary of conventional horror, especially considering I find clips from The Exorcist funny. But I think it's an important thing to take in mind that doesn't really detract from the enjoyment of most of these films. So, if I sound a little bit snobby on some of these films, I apologize, but some of these have to try a tiny bit harder to genuinely scare me. So I basically initially scoured some of the films my cinephile friends on Letterboxd have watched, and to properly review them in a rather live and friendly way, I decided I could rate these films in the most conventional YouTube way, which is the bread, butter, and bane of YouTube's existence for a few years. Yes, folks, I'm doing a tier list. Hello, JMAA from the editing phase here most likely. I like to point out that a lot of these movie reviews are going to have very heavy spoilers in advance, so be warned about it if you don't watch this. Also, I have to carefully and critically edit this video to not show any gore or violence for the YouTube version, because I don't want to risk an age-gate or a community guideline strike. Yes, YouTube is that arbitrary enforcing the rules, so the full uncensored version with all the nasty stuff is going to be exclusive for the Goon Fund patrons for €5 a month at BecomeAGoon.today. Now, on to the video. The first 2016 Terrifier movie isn't obviously the best of the three that I watched so far, but it is still good in its own way. I think this is the film that mostly split their audiences in half, for how utterly visceral and, let's say, controversial this film is with the heavy use of extreme slasher film gore and the sort. But me personally, I like this one. Some parts of the film maybe did ache me a little bit, and it doesn't help that a lot of this has no other story than a story excuse to show off gory kills from Art the Clown, than that this film is particularly cheap in budget compared to other slasher films in the industry. But if you know me, you know that I like rather cheap practical effects on film, and it shows that the director of this film, Damien Leone, is very creative with such a limited budget to create a rather successful and yet conventional slasher horror film. Let me preface this by saying I love Art the Clown. David Howard Thornton is perhaps acting really good in such a charming yet terrifying role as the Scalar Clown. The guy isn't just limited to violently and brutally murder rather bland girl tropes, but he does a lot of clown gestures and stuff that adds just a balance of comedy and horror to the whole thing. It is definitely an innovative way to create such a slasher horror villain. As for the rest of the characters in this film, however, it is kinda a shame that they're just blank generic body bags, since they lack personality or character in this film. They're just limited to being the victims of art in a very convenient and painful ways, and I cannot honestly understand how they're still using the dumb blonde girl trope to this day, which it can be unintentionally misogynistic as I said, dumb blonde dies in a very horrifying, shocking way for the sake of shock value. But the rest of the film is very creative and as a rather typical slasher horror film. It's pretty fun, nonetheless, as a very gory popcorn flick, and you also have to consider it as well, especially considering the director's words on the matter, that a lot of the rather more misogynistic tropes in this movie is pretty much, fortunately or unfortunately, a common tradition in these sorts of classic slasher films. Besides, I don't particularly see so far that Damien Leone or any of the cast or crew are particularly misogynistic at all after looking at interviews about the matter. It's just that the movie, let's say, lacks a solid story, other than it just being a series of gory kills on mostly women, as one might consider it a sort of legal snuff film, and maybe that will sort of detract from the enjoyment of the series as a whole. But you know, this movie's got a comparatively really small budget to work with, and it's not the kind of film Hollywood will fund, so it does that. Overall, it is a creative and enjoyable film. Nonetheless, despite its obvious flaws, and it's no wonder why it became such a viral hit back then. I'd place this movie on A tier for now, but the following in the Terrifier series will show that it gets better. It definitely gets better. Terrifier 2 is better, especially because of its higher budget, because the previous Terrifier film had such a massive success in comparison to its previous budget, so it's noticeable that there are a whole plethora of improvements compared to the previous entry. Terrifier 2 now has a solid storyline to play with, which is kinda basic slasher story stuff, but regardless, it's a nice addition to the film, which makes it not just a series of kills from the clown himself, and I feel like a lot of the practical effects have also improved in comparison. Sienna's addition to the story, especially, tends to ease off the prior vibes of misogyny that the previous film had, making her a rather appropriate final girl for the series. It is still far from perfect as a Terrifier entry, granted, because it still kinda plays off the usual stereotypes and tropes of the slasher film genre, but you can honestly forgive that because the movie was pretty much a blast to watch. You can notice as well, Terrifier 2 starts to play off with the supernatural elements in the series. The Clown is not just a psycho slasher killer, presumably human, but it's become quite of a supernatural entity related to a whole fight between good and evil that's obviously going to be explored much more in the next film. And it's really good that compared to other films in this video, the story tends to unveil itself in a sort of balance between the story development bits, which are more laid back, and the super gory elements of the film. And for those complaining there's not much comic relief from any of the characters of the film, I mean, just look at the Clown. He's a comic relief as much as he's terrifying to watch. One scene in particular that proves this furthermore is the one scene where Sienna is getting stuff from a Halloween store, where Art is just basically goofing around with Halloween custom props before killing the store clerk. Moments like these just make Art the Clown a top tier slasher horror killer for that matter, and he doesn't really need to say a word like Freddy Krueger to do so. I mean, he's a clown. The end of the film especially highlights the supernatural elements even more than the previous one, where Sienna just basically becomes a divine entity of sorts. It is still a horror slasher popcorn flick, don't get me wrong, but the movie still pushes onward with even more creative kills and gore. And I get why for some people that might be a problem, but if you're like me who at least thinks these are just fake practical effects, you know to really work this one real well. At least you know the director and crew have limits to not cross. The previous film might have been a bit of a lackluster entry for some viewers compared to this one, and maybe that's why some people don't watch this series at all. But if you want to probably ignore the first Terrifier film, I recommend you starting with the Terrifier 2 directly if you want to probably have the story ease off the huge amount of gore in the series. S tier, really good. I will really recommend it. It's noticeable that the First Omen is a direct prequel to the 1976 film, The Omen. When you think about it, this film is recommendable to be started with or continue with alongside the 1976 sequel. The only caveat I can place in this film is that bullshit back from the shock value elements of it, especially with the theme of unwanted pregnancies going on, which sounds like a horror film trend of the decade. Dark magic pregnancies seen here. But overall, it's a movie that slowly cooks and brews in a way that progressively gets more intense slowly, but with a certain constant acceleration. And the climax to this movie really pays off. When she gives birth to Damien, the Antichrist, alongside a twin sister, you can slowly start to progressively see the glaring red flags that the protagonist starts to see as she uncovers a plot to set forth the set birth of the Antichrist. Even then, aside of the abortion messaging here, which I find appropriate in the Roe v. Wade abolishment times, what am I supposed to take away here? That God is good and Satan is bad? This might sound like a Reddit tier atheist take, but maybe that's a bit of another caveat I can find in this film. Besides, the shock material isn't really as present as Terrifier movies, even though this shit shock material is not as funny as Art the Clown dancing around brutally killing people, so the scare factor of this movie is still nicely present in some way or another. Not as much as another movie in this video because it's not the kind of scare factor that tickles my psyche, but this feels appropriate. I'm placing this film in the A tier. Sort of a recommendable movie if you enjoy horror movies with Antichrist themes in it, and even if it's not a movie for the really impatient. Where do I even begin with this one? This one is bad, confusing, and infuriating. But again, it's sort of a B movie, so okay. For starters, it is a cheap film, and not in a Terrifier style charming way, but in every bad way possible. It's noticeable that this B movie is designed to cash in on the trend of Winnie the Pooh, the novel and not the Disney property, coming to the public domain with anything that barely resembles a horror slasher film, and it does a pretty bad job at it. The artists supposed to be Winnie the Pooh or Piglet, or two hillbillies in masks. Don't get me wrong, they sort of look terrifying to look at, sort of, but the movie is supposed to be about half human, half animal beings, and this is the best you could come up with. The movie isn't just cheap in the sense of how obviously fake the practical gore effects are, but also in the general sense of the plot and character development. To begin with, the plot is an incredible mess, with plotlines that are addressed briefly once and never progress, characters that can be replaced by planks of wood, and even the stupidest character decisions possible. So most of the characters, which are sadly women by the way, are painted as dumb broads that serve for the body count of the film. Christopher Robin here, for a character that is so prevalent in the Winnie the Pooh property, barely gets screen time even. And I hate that the movie takes itself too seriously as a horror slasher film. Kevin creative with a Pooh Bear or Piglet and give them the funny Pooh voice, for instance, as a kind of funny but terrifying way of putting that said slasher killer. But instead we're dealing with just a generic, deep, growly voice. The movie is so cowardly, even to hide in their shots the gore of the film, whether to keep it as PG as possible. I mean, it's not like it's going to be funded by Hollywood, so why bother? It's sort of unintentionally funny in a way that's cringe. And I think it would have been better off if this movie, instead of getting a similar sequel, had to be put again in the cooking oven. Overall, I really wish for Disney lobbyists to extend the public domain deadline longer so atrocities like this wouldn't happen again. C tier. Even though there is a redeemable quality of being unintentionally cringe, it's incredibly insulting. It's more of a meh movie than it should be, that should be probably forgotten about. I like the Evil Dead franchise, and yes, even Army of Darkness. They're groovy. And it's a shame that Bruce Campbell couldn't make it to the main cast in some way or another, but at least he gets to be the executive producer of this film. How nice. It's a nice entry to the Evil Dead series if you like a twist on the original first two Evil Dead movies, and I especially like it a bit more when he pulls the classic lines such as "I'll swallow your soul" or "Dead by Dawn" into it. It's an entry that takes itself a bit more seriously than other more classic Evil Dead entries, and I miss the goofiness of the originals here for some reason, but it's incredibly valid as a solid entry in the franchise, which is pretty entertaining to watch. The concept of the dead-eyed evil spirits as some sort of contagion that spreads from the Necronomicon itself to anyone alive or dead might be previously explored in previous films, but this is ramped up to 11 in Evil Dead Rise, especially near the end. It's also pretty gory in enough amounts, it's striking a certain level of blood that might not be on par with the Terrifier series, but surely enough to be an entertaining carnage by itself. A tier has some tiny flaws and it might not be the cup of tea for some of the more classic Evil Dead fans, but it sure really works well. Not to mention I already did a review of this movie on this very channel if you want to check it out more in detail. I'll tell you a particular something. We organized a series of movie nights on our Discord server for the remainder of October to watch some horror films. All of them happen to be about, killer clowns and the sort. On the second week, right after we watched the first two Terrifier films and the first one back to back, we watched It, the 2017 reboot and its first chapter. And let me tell you, I just called it quits midway through the film because, jeez, what an unbearable watch. I hate this film for many reasons, not only because it drags for too long, even beyond Marvel movie levels, but also because Stephen King's writings shine through for how unbearably annoying they are. I don't know if it's because of Stephen King's writings, but the Losers Club has a worse off time with daily life problems and bullies alongside very mean adults compared to Pennywise itself. I mean, what's the fucking deal with it? Pennywise is barely a threat in comparison, not to mention, I already talked about this person compared to Tim Curry's one. Even every grown-up and adult is so uncomfortably mean to the kid protagonists here that I feel it's unnecessary. Most of the film is spent with either the adults making a cunt out of themselves or little Pennywise taunting the kids. This is one of the reasons this film drags on and on and on. And we all know how this is gonna end. I mean, come on, you've seen the original It. I've probably seen it. We've all seen it. This is just going to end with Pennywise just fucking off and disappearing into nothing. And for me to sit through all of this, just for that conclusion alone, makes me irritated. Hell, at least Tim Curry was funny. I understand the work done in this film. I really want to appreciate it. But this movie definitely has made me uncomfortable as hell. And people like me should not fucking watch it. F tier. This one is pretty heavy. I'd say this movie particularly tickled my deeply rooted psychological phobias the most, especially with a pretty cool scene at the end. But its messaging about trauma, I'd say now that I think of it, it's not that clever. This movie is especially about trauma, but there are some films that did the messaging about trauma a lot better than this one. Check Jack Saint's video about the subject from last year for a better take than mine, by the way. Here it feels like the subject of trauma is mishandled for a cheap horror ending, and even if I still had my good time watching the film and probably being traumatized by the ending, that's probably gonna be a rather controversial part. This movie, even if it still counts with some rather cheap jump scares for a change, still is very well done, in a similar fashion to that of The Ring. A thing that I like about this film is how the suspense builds up gradually in a rather interesting way, even though there are a few cheap moments, but you don't want to guess what happens to Mustache the Cat. And yes, Smile has a thinly veiled half-dash message about trauma, which is with such a glaring unnecessary twist ending that it might lead you to believe that the solution is to let people into your life to sort out your traumatic experiences, but nope, I guess we're gonna show off this traumatic monster by now. That's the most irksome thing, that this film is really terrifying to a psychological level even, but it happens to mismanage their messaging about trauma very badly, so much so that it's harmful, and I have to agree with Jack Saint on this particular topic. Hollywood really needs to stop pushing off these harmful messages about icky subjects like mental health or trauma into the film's writings. It doesn't really help anybody. But hey, I guess the most dramatic moment I had with this film is when they did something to Mustache. I wonder what. No! What have they done to you, Mustache? No! A tier. It is fine, although there are some rather bad messages about trauma. It's good. Hey, have you heard about the castle? You should go there to get your permit. Oh, what's that? You're tired of shit? Well, don't mind sleeping at a nearby tavern there where everyone is talking about the castle. Castle this, castle that. Oh, you cannot sleep at the tavern? Well, ask the castle about it. Oh no, no one at the castle hired a land surveyor? Well, ask the castle about it. That castle that sends you mad. Better look at in all those castle documents in that closet to see if they hired a land surveyor. Whoops, no one did? Why not ask the castle? This lady is madly in love with you. Better ask the castle's duke just to be sure. And if the castle doesn't approve, which I'm sure the castle never will, well, at least you know the real horror of this movie is to feeling too stupid to not punch Michael Haneke in the face for making a movie about a work from Franz Kafka that he abandoned because it was too weak, so the movie abruptly ends like that Soviet itchy and scratchy thing, and how this film slipped by the San Sebastian Horror Film Festival's Film Commission. Kafka rolling in his grave. The port is next to the seaside. D tier. I get what Haneke tried to do, but this movie pisses me off more than asking for a simple administrative formality like permit number 838. Good grief, a palate cleanser for once. Killer Klowns is goofy. It's silly, a silly old B-movie horror flick with tons of slapstick in it and this sort. Not really meant to scare you, to be frank, but just to have a blast watching, just like I did with this one. Just a movie about some killer alien clowns who land in a suburb to abduct unsuspecting victims and turn them into cotton candy cocoons to later consume. They shoot with popcorn guns, which popcorn turns alive into alien clown heads, and they do all these goofy kills and tricks. Fun for the whole family, I suppose. B tier. Get it? Because it's a B movie. Don't play the asymmetrical multiplayer horror game though, it's bad. I think it's pretty likely for me to say that I love this movie. I really did. I watched it at our San Sebastian Horror Film Festival this year and had a jolly old time like it was early Christmas, hence why the movie is set on Christmas compared to the previous Terrifier movies. But I think, clearly speaking, this is the best so far we could get of Art the Clown, and Ricky Heiss as well is a nice compliment to this film as one of the film's most prominent villains next to Art. I mean, she literally masturbates with a shard of glass, what else do you need? I'd say if you enjoyed the second film, you'll enjoy this one more. Maybe fan service isn't kinda your thing, but this is so far the crown of the series. The gore is more than the second one. There's more blood, there's more Sienna, there's a recurring theme with PTSD that Art supernaturally plays around with. There are more supernatural elements, and this is the best Art the Clown performance I've seen so far in the series. This movie is beyond S tier. It is a triple S tier, a must watch. And maybe gore isn't your thing, but for me, it's real fun. So those are the movies I watched on Halloween 2024. In all seriousness though, I've been honestly focusing too much on my mental hassle of not pushing forth content for a while, and I really needed something to fill me up for a bit. I know content didn't come constantly because I felt the burnout of focusing too much on the algorithm for a bit, but as it turns out, making content, games, whatever it is, really fills me purpose in this life, and maybe I can address it in a more convenient way in another video more than here. Halloween has just reminded me of doing things I enjoy doing, and not just limited to creating content, but consuming content that I can truly enjoy without judging it or boycotting it, which is a common thing I used to do when I was in the alt-right for a bit. I used to not watch movies because I found them to be too woke or something like that. And that sort of limited my ability to enjoy things, movies, games, and so on. If any valuable lesson can be found for now in this late Halloween season, is that just learn to enjoy things. Don't look up on Google whether a horror film is work or not, or something like that, but learn to appreciate filmmaking from a more open mindset. I know that chats are not going to listen to this, most likely, but for the rest of you, I hope you really had a nice Halloween, trick or treating, watching horror films, and hey, maybe next Halloween we can enjoy some more horror films too. So now that's out of the way, happy late Halloween, and now, Merry Christmas.